I knew my sister hated me, but I did not know how far she would go until she slid a birthday gift across the table and laughed. Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake of the family. Months later, when our family's estate lawyer called them for an urgent meeting about me, their faces went pale. Most people pictured family as a soft place to land. Mine always felt more like a house with cold, marble floors, beautiful from the outside, freezing once you stepped in. Growing up in the Ellington home in Denver, Georgia learned early how to make herself small. She was the quiet child, the one who did her homework without being asked, the one who disappeared into corners so my mother, Evelyn, would not sigh, and my sister, Naomi, would not sneer. Even then, Naomi's world seemed to orbit at the center of everything. She had a way of commanding attention without earning it. Loud laughter, dramatic stories, a talent for turning every room into her stage. And my mother, Evelyn, applauded her every move. When Naomi got a B on a test, she was, well, rounded. When I brought home straight A's, Mom blinked like she had forgotten who I was for a moment before saying, "That is nice, Georgia. Can you help set the table?" By the time I reached 35, I had built a life far from that house. Austin suited me: quiet mornings, simple routines, the kind of stability I had never had as a child. I worked as a financial analyst, dressed in soft, neutral tones, and tried not to think about the constant ache that came from being the forgotten daughter. But when my father, James Ellington, passed away, the gravity of our family pulled me back. He had been the only steady thing in that house, a man of few words, but a surprising warmth. I remembered the small moments: a hand on my shoulder, a proud nod at my college graduation. I did not know then that he carried a secret, darker than anything I could imagine. 3 months after the funeral, Mom insisted we have a small birthday dinner at the old house. Her voice over the phone was too bright, too rehearsed, as if she were reading lines someone else had given her. When I stepped through the front door, I smelled the familiar mix of lemon polish and old books. The massive chandelier glowed, casting diamonds on the high ceiling, but the house felt emptier without Dad's quiet presence. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, flipping through glossy resort brochures, tanned from some recent trip, barely glancing at me as I entered. Mom was already pouring herself more wine than usual, her hands trembling slightly around the crystal stem. Something unspoken hung in the air like a storm that had not broken yet. I tried asking about the will gently, respectfully. Mom froze, her smile stiff. "We are just not ready yet," she said, but her eyes flicked to Naomi. And Naomi smirked like she knew a secret I did not. Looking back, the dinner was never about celebrating my birthday. It was about setting the stage for my humiliation. The tension that night did not arrive in one sharp moment. It crept in slowly, like a draft under a closed door. Every small detail felt off. Naomi kept glancing at me with this expectant look, as if she were waiting for a cue only she and my mother had rehearsed. Mom's wine glass was never empty, though she barely drank from it. Her fingers just circled the stem over and over like she needed something to hold on to. Dinner itself was a performance. Naomi talked non-stop: her job, her husband, her plans to redo her kitchen in a French farmhouse aesthetic. Mom laughed at every comment, even the unfunny ones. When I spoke, the room seemed to dim like someone turned down the volume of my existence. Halfway through the meal, Naomi leaned back, eyes glinting. "So, Georgia," she said sweetly, "still working at that same firm in Austin?" Before I could answer, she jumped back into another story about herself. It was not a question. It was a reminder: you are background noise. Still, something else simmered beneath her smug expression: anticipation. Calculation. When Mom stood to bring out dessert, a small store-bought cake she had not even bothered to plate, Naomi pushed back her chair dramatically. "Actually," she said, Reaching for a glossy box wrapped in silver paper, I brought a birthday gift. Something I think you will find enlightening. Mom's face drained of color. Naomi. But Naomi ignored her, sliding the box across the table toward me like it contained evidence instead of a present. Go on, she said, her smile razor-thin. Open it. I peeled back the paper, a strange stillness settling over me. Inside was a DNA testing kit. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Naomi leaned in, laughing under her breath. Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake in this family. The words echoed, sharp and deliberate. Mom flinched. I saw it, but she said nothing. The humiliation stung, but the fear in Mom's eyes. That felt like the real truth slipping through the cracks. Naomi had not just insulted me. She had exposed something she was not supposed to say out loud. Picking up the broken pieces of that night, Georgia knew she could not outrun the secret anymore. The silence in the dining room, broken only by the refrigerator's hum, had been deafening, but it was Naomi's satisfaction and my mother's fear that truly hammered home the reality. This was a war for my identity. And the first shot had been fired. Later that night, in my old bedroom, the walls still painted the soft blue I had chosen at 15. I searched through old boxes like someone looking for proof of their own existence. I was looking for a sign, any hint that the last 35 years had been real, that my father's pride in me was not a lie. I pulled out old photo albums, report cards, drawings from elementary school. Everything looked normal, but under the surface of every memory, the ice water of Naomi's accusation was beginning to freeze the edges. At the back of the closet, tucked beneath a stack of high school yearbooks, I found an envelope that did not belong with the others. It was plain cream cardstock, and the dust around it had been disturbed recently, suggesting my mother or Naomi had been checking it. My heart hammered against my ribs, suddenly loud in the still house. My hands, which usually stayed steady when analyzing millions of dollars in financial data, shook as I tore the flap open. Inside was a photograph, a much younger Evelyn holding me as a baby. She looked tired but strangely resolute. Next to her stood a man I did not recognize. He was tall, with dark hair, and he held my mother's arm with a gentle formality. He was definitely not James Ellington. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in my mother's unmistakable, sloping handwriting, were two words that sliced through the decades of silence. Forgive me. The guilt was not mine, but the secret was. My hands shook as I took pictures of everything with my phone. The photo, the note, the dust pattern. Then, I turned my attention back to the silver, wrapped box resting on the bedside table. Naomi had delivered the DNA kit like a weapon, hoping I would crumble. She had wanted something to happen. Fine. She would get her wish. I mailed the kit the next morning from a nondescript post office box in Denver. Not because Naomi wanted me to, but because I needed to know what truth she was so eager to weaponize. If my entire life had been built on a foundation of cold lies, I needed the forensic facts to rebuild it. 5 weeks later, the results arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was back at my desk in Austin, listening to the soft hum of the office vents, when the notification popped up on my phone. I expected dread. I expected the shattering realization of a lifetime of deception to send me spiraling. What I did not expect was clarity, sharp, cold, and utterly undeniable. No biological relationship detected with the Ellington family. My breath hitched, but I kept reading. A suggested match to the Hartman lineage. A name I had never spoken, never heard, suddenly tied to me by blood. It did not hurt the way I imagined it would. It felt like confirmation of something I had always sensed. I was a guest in my own childhood, never a true daughter. The feeling was not pain. It was the intellectual confirmation of being an outsider that replaced decades of confusing, aching insecurity. What shook me more came next. I carefully took a screenshot of the results, cropping out my personal data, leaving only the clinical declaration of non-relationship and the suggested lineage. Nothing dramatic, just a screenshot and a simple question. I sent it to our family group chat. Does anyone want to explain this? My phone buzzed almost instantly. Mom called, sobbing, not from remorse, but from fear. Georgia, sweetheart, please delete that. You do not understand. This is complicated. Things happened a long time ago. We moved past them. She never apologized. She never addressed the decades I spent feeling like a burden in her home. She just begged me to bury the truth again. But Naomi did not call. She texted. Just 4 cold, smug words that confirmed her calculated satisfaction. Well, now you know. The sentence carried the weight of someone who had been waiting half her life for the moment I discovered I did not belong. Evelyn's panicked. Sobbing call proved she wanted the truth buried. Naomi's cold word text, well, now you know, proved she wanted me gone. The contrast between my mother's terrified begging and my sister's calculated satisfaction was the final piece of evidence I needed. This was not a secret kept out of protection. It was a secret kept out of convenience, ready to be weaponized the moment the opportunity arose. That night, I called Naomi, shaking with questions I did not know how to ask. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with the theatrical irritation she often used when she had to deal with me. Why, Georgia? Why now? She demanded, as if she were the aggressor for seeking her own lineage. Why push this? Why humiliate me? I demanded, my voice tight. You have always hated me. But why use Dad's death to bring this out? She laughed softly, a sound that hit like ice against a window pane. Because I have kept this family's secret for 20 years. Because Mom owed me. Because you have played victim long enough. Her voice dropped slightly, becoming hard and cruel. And now the right people will finally get what they deserve. She hung up before I could process the meaning of her last sentence. Those words clung to me like smoke. It was not just about my humiliation anymore. It was about the estate. The next morning, I started asking quiet questions. I spoke to family friends, old neighbors, people who had known my parents before Naomi and I were born. I used the quiet discretion I had perfected as a financial analyst, framing my questions around nostalgia for my father. What emerged was chilling. Naomi had been digging for months. She had taken several lengthy trips back to Denver, far exceeding what was necessary for the funeral. She had been seen meeting with estate lawyers, dropping hints about upcoming changes to the will, and talking as if Dad's estate already belonged to her alone. She was building a legal case to invalidate any claim I might have, leveraging the fact that I was not a biological Ellington. The photo I found, the DNA test she delivered, the timing of her plotting, it all clicked into place. Naomi had not intended for me to find out the truth and live peacefully. She intended for the truth to be the instrument of my erasure from the Ellington legacy. I realized I was fighting not just a sister's resentment, but a sophisticated, greedy plot. I needed help. Real help. The kind my father would have insisted I seek. I needed a counter-strategist. I hired Sarah Ang, an inheritance and litigation attorney known for her calm, sharp work in complicated family disputes. I flew back to Denver for a meeting, bringing her everything: the DNA results, the photograph with my mother's handwritten note, screenshots of Naomi's smug and threatening messages, and the odd conversations I had endured. Sarah listened, her expression still, taking notes like she was assembling a complicated, high-stakes puzzle. She did not express pity or outrage, just strategic focus. "Your instincts are right, Georgia," she said finally, setting down her pen. "This is not just resentment. This is calculated financial maneuvering. Someone is building a case to erase you from the estate ledger entirely." We spent the next several days preparing a complete profile of the Ellington finances and the family's dynamics. Sarah's professional distance was exactly what I needed. She treated my life not as a tragedy, but as a complicated legal case that could be won with facts and strategy. I was learning to accept vulnerability by entrusting my destiny to her, allowing a professional to guide me through this crisis. I was no longer the small child hiding in corners. I was a client fighting for her life's stability, using the very facts Naomi thought would destroy me. Sarah's involvement immediately shifted the tone of the conflict. I could feel the power returning to my own hands, not through emotion, but through cold, hard legal preparedness. The confrontation I dreaded was coming. But now, I would not be facing it alone. Sarah's preparation gave Georgia a sense of control, but the true weight of the battle only landed when Mr. Dalton, the estate lawyer, called with a chilling warning. My entire strategy was based on intellectual distance, yet a familiar. Cold dread began to seep into my bones, reminding me that this was still my family, my history, and my life on the line. The call came 3 days after I had returned to Austin. Mr. Dalton, our longtime estate lawyer, sounded unusually formal, his voice precise and clipped over the phone. "Georgia," he began, bypassing any polite small talk. "Your father left instructions for a will reading under specific circumstances. Those circumstances have now been met." My chest tightened. "What circumstances, Mr. Dalton?" "He anticipated complications," Dalton replied carefully. "He required that all primary parties be aware of the facts before the reading could proceed. That said, I think you should be prepared for what you are going to hear, Georgia. This is not a standard probate reading." Prepared. I doubted anyone could have truly been prepared for the complex machinery James Ellington had set in motion. The simple fact that he had foreseen Naomi's aggression and Evelyn's inability to stop it was a devastating truth in itself. It proved that my quiet, reserved father had understood the emotional landscape of our family better than anyone, and he had taken deliberate steps to protect the one he chose. The realization filled me with a powerful, desperate mix of fear and gratitude. The morning of the will reading, I flew back to Denver. The city felt colder than I remembered it. Not a seasonal cold, but the kind that sinks into the bone, the kind that feels like a warning. Sarah and I arrived early at the downtown building, where Mr. Dalton's office occupied the top floor. It was the kind of firm designed to project unassailable financial power on a floor. Ceiling windows overlooking the city, dark mahogany paneling, and the quiet hush of expensive carpeting. It was a place where truths did not hide, they echoed. We chose seats near the window, slightly out of the direct line of fire at the long, polished conference table. Sarah's expression was calm, her pencil poised over a legal pad. "Observe everything, Georgia," she whispered, her voice a low anchor. "Speak only when necessary. Let them talk. They will reveal their motives." Her calm steadiness eased the tightness in my chest. She treated the meeting like an observation deck for a slow, motion car crash, and her professionalism allowed me to inhabit the role of the steady financial analyst I actually was, rather than the humiliated daughter. Mom arrived next. She looked exhausted, like she had not slept in days. Her usually perfect blonde hair was hastily pinned back, and she wore a shapeless dark dress. She clutched her purse with both hands as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. She did not greet me. She did not even meet my eyes. She sank into a chair at the far end of the table, staring at the polished surface as though it might swallow her whole. Her silence was a heavy, suffocating admission of guilt and fear. Then Naomi entered. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of the waiting area, a sound that carried a theatrical smugness. Each step she took carried a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She wore an expensive, cream-colored suit, perfectly tailored and heavy makeup that made her look sharper, harder. And of course, she brought her own attorney, a man in his 50s, I instantly recognized from billboards advertising aggressive estate litigation. Naomi gave me a slow smile, one corner lifting higher than the other. "Georgia," she said, using the greeting like a dismissal, as if acknowledging someone irrelevant. But her eyes gleamed with expectation. She believed she had already won. She had the DNA evidence, she had the legal muscle. In her mind, the will reading was merely a formality before her vindication. Mr. Dalton entered last, carrying a thick folder that looked like it contained a historical treaty, rather than a will. He moved with the deliberate calm of someone who understood the precise weight of what he was about to unleash upon our small gathering. When he reached the head of the table, he rested a hand on the folder and looked at each of us, taking a long moment to meet our eyes, one by one. "Before we begin," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I want to note that James Ellington left explicit instructions for how this reading should proceed. He anticipated complications." Dalton paused, his gaze lingering on Naomi, and then Evelyn. "Everything I am about to share was prepared with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising. There will be no questions until I have read the entire document." Naomi shifted, her initial smirk faltering for the first time. The confirmation that James had been ahead of her, that he had already planned for this betrayal, was like a physical blow to her calculated confidence. I felt a surge of pride in my father. Even in death, he was protecting me. The truth he had carried in silence was now ready to speak on my behalf. "Mr." Dalton opened the folder, and the air in the room seemed to solidify. The moment of truth was upon them. I watched Naomi's face. She had reset her expression to one of hard expectation, the look of a predator waiting for its reward. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into herself, preparing for the public shattering of her secret. Dalton began reading the dense, formal text, his voice cutting through the silence. "I, James Robert Ellington, declare this my final will and testament. I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, investment accounts, and all residual assets, to my daughter, Georgia Ellington." Silence snapped across the room like a whip. It was a complete, profound vacuum of sound. Naomi shot out of her chair, the movement so abrupt the expensive mahogany scraping against the floor. Her face was immediately livid, her careful makeup unable to mask the sudden, raw fury. "No," she shouted, the sound echoing off the polished walls. "She is not his daughter. We have DNA proof. She has no legal standing, none." Dalton held up one hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless stopped Naomi mid-sentence. His expression was utterly unmoved. "Please sit. There is more to be read." As I stated. Reluctantly, sputtering under her breath, Naomi sank back into her seat, though her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. Her attorney, a man named Mr. Vance, looked equally shocked, rapidly flipping through his own papers, suddenly sweating. Dalton continued reading, his voice gaining a deliberate weight with every word. "I have known since Georgia was 2 years old that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway. I chose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. This decision requires no further validation." The words struck with the precision of a master plan. It was the complete, total, immediate invalidation of Naomi's entire plot. Her weapon, the DNA test, was revealed to be useless, an anticipated factor in my father's final wishes. It was a massive, devastating power reversal. Naomi's complexion drained to a sickly, pasty gray. She gaped, her eyes wide, staring at Dalton as if he had just recited a demonic incantation. Evelyn closed her eyes, too slow, painful tears tracking paths through the makeup on her cheeks. She was not crying for me. She was crying for the decades of deceit that had now been laid bare. I sat there, numb. The financial details of the inheritance barely registered. The true impact was the validation. I was not a mistake. I was a choice. All the years I had made myself small, believing I was an unwanted burden, were wiped away by a single, carefully constructed sentence penned by the quiet man who had always loved me. It was the greatest gift he could have left. But Dalton was not finished. He paused, looking directly at Naomi, and the atmosphere in the room changed again, shifting from solemn revelation to imminent execution. 8 months before his death, Dalton continued, his voice steady, Mr. Ellington hired a private investigator to document any attempts to manipulate or interfere with his estate, particularly regarding his 2 daughters. Naomi gave a small, panicked gasp. Her eyes darted to her attorney, a clear signal of recognition and terror. The investigator, Dalton said, placing a thick stack of documents on the table, gathered substantial evidence. This includes detailed financial statements, meeting logs, and transcripts demonstrating Naomi Ellington's efforts to pressure her father into altering his will during his illness. He tapped the stack with a long finger. This documentation also includes unauthorized withdrawals, totaling $50,000 during his last months, listed incorrectly as home maintenance expenses. Mr. Vance, Naomi's attorney, finally found his voice, high and panicked. We were not informed of this investigation. This evidence may be inadmissible. Dalton cut him off, his voice firm and final. You were not required to be. Additionally, the investigation documented consultations with 3 separate estate lawyers, detailed conversations about upcoming changes to the family inheritance structure, and the purchase of a specific DNA test, mailed to Naomi's home address, and later gift wrapped. Naomi's eyes widened to an impossible degree. That is ridiculous, she whispered, her voice shaking violently. That was a joke. A family joke. Dalton set down the final document, a single, folded piece of paper written in my father's unmistakable script. He did not read this one from the will. He read it from the man James Ellington had been. The words sealed Naomi's fate with paternal authority. Mr. Ellington requested that I read this aloud, Dalton said. He unfolded the page. Naomi, I know what you have been planning. I watched you try to manipulate your mother. I hoped you would choose differently. These consequences are your own doing. Naomi's accusation that the will was fraudulent died in her throat as Dalton set down a new stack of documents. Proof that the deceased had been watching. The sheer scale of my father's foresight left me numb. He hadn't just endured Naomi's entitlement, he had strategically countered it. Even while he was dying, a sound escaped Naomi's throat. It was part gasp, part animalistic growl. The realization that she had been not only caught, but documented was crushing her theatrical confidence. Her attorney, Mr. Vance, leaned toward her, his face pale and tight, whispering harshly, Do not contest this, Naomi. There is a no contest clause. You will lose everything. But Naomi was spiraling, years of greed and entitlement preventing her from processing rational thought. She slapped her hands down on the table. This is fraud. The private investigator was just a trick. Georgia manipulated him. She tricked a dying man. Sarah stood up slowly, calmly, her voice quiet but powerful. Mr. Ellington's will explicitly acknowledges George's parentage and documents his reasoning for the distribution. The documentation detailing your efforts to influence him is substantial, Naomi. Any contest, especially after the reading of this evidence, would be deemed frivolous and trigger the no contest clause. Mr. Vance looked at Dalton, his voice a desperate plea. A no contest clause. What are the specifics, Mr. Dalton? Dalton turned a page in the large folder. The specifics are threefold, Mr. Vance. First, Immediate forfeiture of the 10% that was allotted to Naomi, due to proven attempts at interference and undue influence. Second, the conversion of an outstanding loan of $200,000, which Mr. Ellington provided to Naomi 5 years ago to purchase her secondary investment property, into a personal and immediate debt owed back to the estate. Naomi shook her head violently. "That is not a loan. He gave me that money." "It was a gift." "Not according to the estate records or the signed promissory note." Dalton replied calmly, tapping another document. "It was logged as a 10-year interest, free loan, repayable to the estate upon his death, unless waived by him in the will. He chose not to waive it. And third," Sarah added smoothly, her eyes locked on Naomi, "the clause triggers immediate repayment of all documented outstanding debts and unauthorized withdrawals, including the $50,000 documented by the private investigator. That totaled $250,000, payable to the estate within 1 calendar year." Naomi's face twisted in horror. She had walked into the room believing she was about to seize a multi-million-dollar estate, and now she was facing $250,000 in sudden, undeniable debt. My mother finally spoke, her voice a fragile, hoarse whisper, directed only at Naomi. "Naomi, stop. You have to stop." But Naomi could not. Years of resentment, entitlement, and fear collided all at once, transforming her polished exterior into something wild and pathetic. "This should be mine," she hissed, directing her venom at the entire room. "All of it! I am the real daughter! I am the one who stayed." I stood slowly. The sheer audacity of her claim, built on a foundation of documented lies and betrayal, finally broke my silence. My voice was low but steady. "You did not stay, Naomi. You controlled. You threatened. You built your life on secrets you never earned. You stayed because you thought he owed you." She turned toward me, wild-eyed and spitting rage. "You do not deserve, Georgia." Dalton gently interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise. "There is something else your father left." He opened a small envelope addressed only to me. It contained a short, folded piece of paper. The entire room fell silent, the rage and the calculations momentarily suspended. I unfolded it, and my vision blurred immediately. It was a short letter, in James's unmistakable, sloping hand. "Georgia, you spent your life believing you were invisible. You were not. I saw your strength, your kindness, your integrity. You were my daughter, not by blood, but by choice. And I leave you my legacy with absolute certainty that you will honor it." The profound grief that had been lurking beneath the triumphant facts finally broke through. I was no longer the client, or the strategist, or the abandoned child. I was the daughter he had chosen. When I looked up, through the tears, I saw Naomi. She finally understood. This was not my victory over her. This was her defeat, crafted perfectly by the quiet man she had underestimated and abused most in the world. Her attorney, sensing the total moral and legal collapse, discreetly began packing his briefcase, already looking for the fastest exit. The meeting was over. The truth was out. But Naomi's years of entitlement and rage would not let her stop, even as her attorney warned her of the consequences. The moment Mr. Dalton finished reading my father's final, gentle letter, I knew that the legal battle was over, but the emotional chaos was just beginning. Naomi, whose face was blotchy and streaked with mascara now, looked utterly unhinged. She pushed away from the table, knocking her chair back with a violent clatter. "I won't accept this," she shrieked. "That letter is a fake? He was on medication? He didn't know what he was doing?" Sarah stepped forward, holding the entire room's gaze. "Naomi, please control yourself. The will was prepared and signed 6 months before your father's death, reviewed by 3 independent witnesses, and explicitly addresses the possibility of contestation." Contestation. Naomi spat the word out like poison. Yes. I will contest every single fraudulent line. He never loved her. He never chose her. Sarah's voice dropped to a level of icy authority that was far more intimidating than shouting. You are triggering the no contest clause, Naomi. I advise you to review the financial penalty with Mr. Vance immediately, or you will lose what little remains. Naomi ignored her own attorney, who was frantically gesturing for her to sit down. The rage was a feedback loop, fueling her belief that she could still bully her way out of the disaster. Evelyn, sitting silently through the entire exchange, finally gathered the last fragments of her courage. Her voice was barely audible, a fragile whisper that nonetheless carried across the room. Naomi, stop. You have to stop. It is done. It is not done. Naomi whirled around on her mother. You should have protected me. I am your real daughter. You let her take everything that was rightfully mine. This was the moment. The years of emotional abuse, the decades of feeling like a burden, and the final, calculated betrayal of the DNA test, all boiled over. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I did not want to shout or scream. I wanted clarity. You do not deserve it, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the chaos like a knife. You are fighting for money. I am fighting for the legacy of the man who chose to be my father. You did not stay here because you loved him or Mom. You stayed because you were waiting to collect. I looked at my sister, whose expression was a mixture of genuine shock and hatred. You did not stay, Naomi. You controlled, you threatened, you built your life on secrets you never earned. And Dad knew it. She took one gasping step toward me, but Mr. Vance physically pulled her back, whispering urgently in her ear about the $200,000 loan and the $50,000 debt hanging over her head. He had given up on saving her inheritance. He was fighting to keep her out of civil court. Mr. Dalton watched the exchange, a flicker of profound wariness crossing his face. When Naomi finally subsided, defeated not by her sister, but by the legal trap she herself had created, Dalton addressed me again. Georgia, that is everything that was within the will's official text. However, there is one last, separate item Mr. Ellington left for you. He handed me a small, flat jewelry box. It was old, dark cherry wood and warm from being held. I opened it. Inside, resting on blue velvet, was not a piece of jewelry, but a polished, antique silver locket. It was plain simple, and the exact opposite of the extravagant things Naomi desired. I unclasped it, revealing two small picture slots inside. One held a tiny, faded picture of my father, James, smiling at the camera. The other was purposefully left empty. His final message, "You were not invisible," was embodied in that simple gift. He did not leave me something ostentatious. He left me a piece of his quiet heart, with space left for my own life. I looked back at Naomi, who was being hastily ushered toward the door by her now miserable lawyer. She finally understood. She had been so focused on the money that she had missed the simple truth. James Ellington had used his estate not to reward wealth, but to measure character. And by that measure, she was left with nothing, and I had received everything. The meeting concluded with a strained, formal handshake between Sarah and Dalton. The emotional battle was over. The quiet aftermath was more potent than the storm. The consequences Naomi faced were direct reflections of the malice she had sown. Within 24 hours of the will reading, Naomi's aggressive attorney withdrew, stating he could not ethically proceed with the case against overwhelming, pre-documented evidence. Naomi was left scrambling, trying to find someone willing to take a case that was already collapsing under its own weight. When she attempted to contest the will anyway, fueled by her final reserves of denial and fury, the judge dismissed her claim immediately. The documentation, the investigators' reports, the meeting logs, the signed loan agreements, was too comprehensive. Within minutes, the no contest clause was airtight, the evidence overwhelming. Her small 10% inheritance vanished, funneled back into the estate as a result of her attempted interference. The loan she had taken from Dad, the $200,000 she always insisted was a gift, converted into personal debt, owed back to the estate. And the $50,000 in unauthorized withdrawals was also added to her debt. She was given 1 year to repay the total $250,000 or face further legal action. For the first time in my life, Naomi looked small. Not humbled, just cornered by the consequences she had always managed to outrun. I handled the logistics from Austin, working closely with Sarah Ang. It felt strange to be in control of the vast Ellington estate, yet my financial background proved invaluable. I managed the accounts, settled the debts, and oversaw the inventory with the same meticulous care I applied to my firm's clients. This time, I was working for myself, securing the future my father had planned for me. A week later, Evelyn came to see me in my small Austin apartment. She sat on my utilitarian couch, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. The color had not returned to her face. "I had to tell you the rest," she whispered, her voice barely scratching above a murmur. The complete truth about the Hartman lineage. The man in the photograph was my first love. It was decades ago. James knew I was pregnant when he married me. He chose me, and he chose you. And he made an agreement with me that the secret would never be used against you. She told me everything the agreement made decades ago. The guilt she carried but never confronted, the sheer terror that Naomi would find the whole story and James would regret his choice. I listened. I heard the whole confession, the whole painful, selfish, scared story of a woman who had chosen comfort over honesty for 35 years. But I did not reach for her. I kept my hands folded in my lap, separated from her by a precise distance. "I want to make things right. Georgia," she whispered, looking up at me, finally meeting my eyes. "I believe you, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But making things right starts with letting me live without carrying your secrets anymore." The truth was, I no longer needed her apology or her closeness. I had the validation of the man who chose me, and I had the peace of knowing my own identity. Some wounds required distance, not closeness. To heal, I needed to build a relationship with my mother based on mutual respect, not buried guilt. In the months that followed, I stepped back from Denver entirely. I managed the estate remotely, and with Sarah's help, put the family home up for sale. The mansion with the cold floors was no longer necessary. I did not need a symbol of wealth, I needed a foundation of peace. I sold the house and the few assets that required maintenance, keeping only the investment portfolio. I used a small portion of the money to purchase a simple, small property in Oregon. It was surrounded by trees, with big windows that let in all the light, a place where the air was clean and the quiet was earned. It was the first time I made a choice without asking who it might disappoint. I left Denver behind and built a quieter life, where the lies could not reach me anymore. I closed my chapter as the forgotten daughter and began my life as the chosen woman. Some endings are not loud. They are not defined by shouting matches or dramatic reversals. They are defined by the moment you choose peace over pain. And if you have ever been the overlooked one, know this: you deserve better than the people who failed to see you. You deserve the simple, quiet life you choose for yourself.